Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a massive story of survival, shifting alliances, and an absolutely unyielding spirit. We are exploring the epic history of Scotland. And look, this isn't just your standard timeline of kings and queens, right? It's a 10,000-year battle balancing independence against huge external influence. And honestly, it explains exactly why the Scottish identity remains so incredibly resilient today.
Okay, let's dive into this. How exactly did a scattered, fierce band of Celtic tribes evolve into a nation with one of the most fiercely patriotic and culturally recognizable identities on the planet? Seriously, it's a gripping saga of adaptation, survival, and a people totally determined to shape their own destiny.
So here is our roadmap. We're going to track Scotland's evolution through 6 major eras, starting with early tribes and Roman resistance, forging the Scottish kingdom, the wars of independence, the Reformation and rebellions, the shift from Enlightenment to industrial decline, and finally, devolution and modern Scotland. Let's get into it. Section 1. Early tribes and Roman resistance. The land we now call Scotland has actually been inhabited for well over 10,000 years. Early people left their mark with these incredible 6,000-year-old megaliths at places like Orkney and the Isle of Lewis. But their first real test, that came from the south. In 43 AD, the Romans invaded Britain. But as Governor Agricola pushed north, they literally hit a wall. Despite the Romans getting a tactical win at Mons Graubius in 84 AD against Calgagis and his fighters, the rugged landscape and the fierce native resistance were simply too much. I mean, the mighty Roman Empire actually had to build colossal structures like Hadrian's Wall just to keep the northerners contained. Fast forward a bit. When the Romans finally packed up and left in 410 AD, the region didn't just suddenly unite. No way. Instead, 4 distinct groups carved up the land. You had the Picts in the northeast, the Anglo-Saxons in the southeast, the Britons in the southwest, and the Gaelic-speaking Scoti in the west, who, by the way, eventually gave Scotland its name. For centuries, these kingdoms were locked in almost constant warfare. But what started to bind them together wasn't politics, it was faith. In 563 AD, the Irish monk St. Columba set up a mission on the island of Iona, bringing them a shared Christian faith. Section 2. Forging the Scottish Kingdom. Let's move to the next phase and see how this builds, because spiritual unity was one thing, but political unity? That required a massive existential crisis. Enter the Vikings. Their devastating coastal raids forced these fractured, warring tribes to unite literally just to survive. In the 840s, Kenneth Mac O'Payne merged the kingdoms of the Scoti and the Picts. This was a crucial step that laid the groundwork for the Kingdom of Alba in the early 10th century. And by the 11th century, this territory expanded southward, officially forming the English border. So, external Viking pressure inadvertently forged the foundation of the modern Scottish kingdom.
Section 3. The Wars of Independence.
Of course, having a kingdom and keeping it are two very different things. In 1286, King Alexander III died unexpectedly, plunging Scotland into a massive crisis. Just look at this number, 14. 14 different nobles claimed the right to the Scottish throne. It was the medieval equivalent of an absolute nightmare. To dodge a civil war, they actually asked King Edward I of England to step in and mediate. Big mistake. He completely exploited the chaos, demanded to be recognized as Scotland's feudal superior, installed a puppet king, invaded in 1296, and even stole the sacred coronation stone of Scottish monarchs, the Stone of Scone. And this brilliantly illustrates what happened next, the legendary Wars of Scottish Independence. William Wallace led a fierce rebellion, scoring a jaw-dropping victory at Stirling Bridge in 1297. Now, Wallace was later captured and executed, but the torch passed to Robert the Bruce. Crowned in 1306, Bruce led the Scots to a historic, decisive win at Bannockburn in 1314. This basically secured de facto independence, which finally got formal recognition with the Treaty of Berwick in 1357. So with independence secured, the new Stuart dynasty got to work consolidating power. Over the next century, Scotland really flourished. They founded major universities and set up Edinburgh as the capital. And by 1468, through a Danish royal marriage, King James III acquired the Orkney and Shetland Islands. This brought the final geographic pieces together. The map of Scotland we recognize today was finally complete.
Section 4. Reformation and Rebellions.
Now entering the 16th century, the pendulum swings right back to chaos. Scotland found itself battered by disastrous military defeats like Flodden Field, and swept up in the massive religious upheaval spreading across Europe. Desperate to break the Catholic alliance between Scotland and France, England's King Henry VIII launched a relentless, violent military campaign.
It was grimly known as the Rough Wooing. His goal? To literally force a marriage between his son and the infant Scottish queen, Mary.
Well, the violent campaign failed, but it exposed a deep, emerging divide. It was basically a clash of titans. Catholic Scotland under Queen Mary versus Protestant England under Queen Elizabeth I. When Mary eventually returned to a Scotland that had formally embraced Protestantism, the political turmoil was immense. Her reign ended in abdication, civil war, and ultimately execution by her cousin Elizabeth. But in a crazy twist of historical fate, Mary's son inherited the English throne in 1603. That united the crowns, even though they remained two completely separate kingdoms for the time being.
Now, what's really interesting about this staggering figure is this: 1/5. By the late 1690s, Scotland was in severe economic trouble. Desperate to compete globally, they poured massive resources into the Darien scheme, which was this super ambitious attempt to build a colony in the jungles of Panama. It was an absolute disaster. Harsh conditions completely wiped out the settlers, and the financial loss was catastrophic, wiping out nearly 20%, 1/5, of the entire nation's wealth. This economic collapse practically backed Scotland into a corner, basically forcing the 1707 Treaty of Union with England to form Great Britain. Now, as you can imagine, this angered a lot of people. The feeling that their hard-won sovereignty had just been sold out fueled decades of bloody Jacobite rebellions. Supporters of the exiled Catholic King James, famously led by Bonnie Prince Charlie, threatened the British state until it all came crashing down in total disaster at the 1746 Battle of Culloden. The British government violently crushed the uprising and systematically dismantled the traditional Highland clan system. Section 5. Enlightenment to Industrial Decline. So out of the ashes of rebellion and the end of the clan system, Scotland executes this incredibly dramatic pivot. Moving into the 18th and 19th centuries, the population absolutely explodes from 1.6 million to over 4.4 million by 1900. This happened right alongside the Scottish Enlightenment, led by brilliant minds like economist Adam Smith, who literally reshaped how the modern economic world works. But, this massive industrialization had a really heavy human cost. Cities became wildly overcrowded, and seeking a better life, about 2 million Scots emigrated to places like North America and Australia. During this time, Scotland basically became the industrial powerhouse of the British Empire. The River Clyde was a global hub for shipbuilding. But as we trace this arc past the First World War, heavy industries started to decline rapidly, leading to severe unemployment and the violent 1919 Glasgow strikes. And by the late 20th century, those traditional industrial sectors had completely collapsed. This severe post-war economic struggle reignited a dormant desire. It sparked growing calls for autonomy and a feeling that decisions made in Westminster just weren't serving Scotland's best interests anymore. Section 6. Devolution and Modern Scotland. So the crucial point is that centuries of political tension, economic shifts, and a persistent national identity culminated in a massive constitutional change in 1999. Devolution wasn't just some political experiment. It was a direct response to a 300-year history of feeling alienated by external Westminster influence. After 3 centuries, the Scottish Parliament was officially reconvened in Edinburgh, reclaiming authority over everyday essential things like health, education, and justice. When we zoom out and look at the whole sweep of this history today, a single constant theme emerges. From the Celtic tribes uniting against Vikings, to the Wars of Independence, the controversial 1707 Treaty of Union, right up to modern devolution. The push and pull between forming necessary alliances and fiercely guarding sovereignty, that is the defining spirit of Scotland. Which leaves us with an incredibly provocative, unresolved question drawn straight from today's headlines. Will Scotland remain in the UK or become an independent nation once more? After a 10,000-year story where external influence has constantly sparked a fierce demand for self-rule, the pendulum is still swinging. It's a fascinating chapter that is still being written. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring.